I will say I wasn't 100% sure why I was asked to speak today because although I own a tech startup, I am not, in fact, a coder. So when I was asked about speaking, I did say I don't know anything about Python other than how to organize my developers to work in Python, but I myself am not a developer. However, I do work in the tech field in Sweden, so I've kind of seen the different challenges that people face. I am a woman, and I am also an immigrant. So after kind of discussions with the organizers, we felt that a discussion around using tech as a gateway and how to unlock opportunities and how companies can support both women and immigrants in the tech sphere is something that's both good for the employees themselves and for the tech industry. Where am I? So first and foremost, a little about me. As you can see, I've been a bit all over the place with my background. So my name is Saaya Sorrells-Weatherford. I am the CEO and co-founder of Immigrants, and we are a legal tech startup that is based in Gothenburg, Sweden. I am born and raised in Tokyo, Japan, so that's where I consider my home. However, growing up as a half Japanese, half white child, then we had kind of a struggle on that end. So my parents sent me to the international school so they could kind of limit the amount of bullying that I would receive. I then did my bachelor's in cinematic art, so film production in Los Angeles. After that, I threw away my parents' very expensive education and decided to become a scuba diving instructor and move to Thailand instead. They didn't really address it for years. But I did work in Thailand and Indonesia in the dive industry, then went back to Japan to work in the entertainment industry, and then finally in 2013, I became the owner of a dive center on Roatan, an island in Honduras. And I did that for 6 years. Again, my parents didn't actually acknowledge it until about year 3 when we started winning awards, and then I became an entrepreneur in my parents' eyes. I moved to Sweden in 2019. And I really wanted to find a job. I wanted to start working because as an adult, what's the best way that you can actually make relationships? It's through your job. And I found that I could not even get internship positions anywhere that I looked, which was a big struggle for me because I also felt like all of that experience and that education I had wasn't translating at all with Swedish companies. And that was a really big struggle for me. So I decided to do my executive MBA at Gothenburg University in the hopes that having the GU tick on my CV would actually help me out. It didn't. And in the end, I joined a company that actually, they were looking for a co-founder, and they specifically wrote, if you have experience moving to Sweden, that's a bonus. And that very rarely is the bonus. So I applied to that and became a co-founder in 2021. And my co-founder, Annalie, is from the Dominican Republic. So both of us have the experience of immigrating through the system and also the problems that women and both immigrants face when it comes to working in the tech industry in Sweden. To make this as interactive as possible, because you guys don't need to just listen to me talk for the next 45 minutes, I thought I would do a bit of a Mentimeter. The code will come up at various points as well, but you are free to interact with it as much or as little as you like, specifically for people that don't super feel comfortable raising their hands, but the code will pop up as well. I sent this out as actually as a survey before this keynote and got feedback to try to get some survey feedback for people that have worked to enter the Swedish tech industry. Why is this an important topic? So the world is growing increasingly reliant on technology. In the EU, nearly 10 million people work in tech, and actually the percentage is about 4.9% of the total workforce in the EU works in ICT. In Sweden, it's about 4% more. So actually, in 2023, ICT specialists made up 8.7% of the total workforce in Sweden. Despite this, by 2030, over 4 million women could be missing from the tech workforce, and millions of immigrants could also be left out of the economy. There are several reasons for that. There's challenges when it comes to actually getting women into tech in the first place, as well as keeping them in tech. But this is a growing problem. But imagine the transformative powers if both of these underrepresented groups had full access to tech opportunities. Specifically, there are systemic challenges that face both women and immigrants in tech, but if we could actually give all of them full access and actually improve as companies and as countries the talent attraction and the retention, specifically in countries like Sweden that are so reliant on innovation, this could unlock massive economic power for Sweden. So in terms of how I want to break it down, we know why we want to diversify our workforce, but why do you want to diversify your workforce? What are the challenges, especially the overlapping challenges faced by women and immigrants? What works if you're an individual that's actually on the job hunt in Sweden? And this is both kind of based on, let's say, research as well as specific feedback. I don't know why my watch is talking. And then how can companies truly support their diversity? So diversity in general, we tend to talk about it in terms of your gender, your ethnic background, your sexual orientation, and that tends to be kind of the superficial layer at which we look at diversity. But at the core of it, diversity is about different thoughts, opinions, and specifically experiences. It doesn't matter if you hire as many diverse people on the superficial level as possible. If everybody has the same thoughts, if everybody fits into the specific company culture, a very defined company culture, then that doesn't actually help your company with regards to innovation because you don't actually have that friction when it comes to opinions and experiences. We know, and research has proved, that diverse teams are more innovative and they bring diverse perspectives that improve products, services, and workplace culture. And especially when it comes to internationalization, diversity is incredibly important. Having people in your company that have experience in the company that you want to go, in the country that you want to go to, is so important to understand that entry country's culture, how they actually work, what actually sells. All of those are so important. So it's actually really important to diversify your organization, especially if you want to internationalize, which most Swedish companies and tech companies do. In terms of just within Sweden, companies that have actually excelled on account of having women or immigrants, or both, inside their company are companies like Spotify, Natural Cycles, iZettle, and Einride, have all had women or immigrants in key leadership positions, specifically as CTOs, CPOs, and COOs as well. And they've managed to bring in a global perspective that's allowed these companies to actually excel at a faster rate. So I changed this at the last minute because I realized it was a bit too niche, but if you want to go into the Mentimeter, originally I said, how do you identify in the Mentimeter? And here I said, how many of you identify as either a woman, an immigrant, or both in the tech field? But I did add Swedish man into this as well, or you can put other, because it'd be interesting to see who identifies as what within this room, so we can actually see the representation of women and or immigrants inside the room. If my tech wants to work. So in this room then at this point in time, so 45 people identify as Swedish man, 38 immigrant, 9 women, 8 are an immigrant and a woman, and 24 as other. I do apologize for not making a more extensive list. I realize we could go very deep with it. But this is interesting. I don't think this is actually probably a real representation of the tech sphere, because I think that there's also very specific people that come to events like this and that come to events that want to kind of dig deeper. So this is not, I would say, a true representation. Within tech globally, about 26% of the tech workforce are women, and it gets smaller still when you go up into the leadership positions. But this is interesting to see, also interesting to see kind of who's interested in these events. So in terms of the challenges faced by women in tech, we specifically have the leaky pipeline, which is where girls and women drop out of tech at a much faster rate than men. And this comes from a lot of different issues, and it already starts at a young age. There's not a lot of encouragement for girls to go into STEM. In a lot of cultures, there's also familial expectations about what kind of is a man and a woman's job, and tech tends not to fall into that. And unfortunately, women can often be the problem. Established women inside of tech or kind of STEM companies. In the US, they did a report about the fact that older women in STEM were actually gatekeeping positions from younger women in STEM, because there is the feeling, and it probably is true, but there is the feeling that there are a limited number of seats at the table for women in STEM, which means that the women that fought very hard to get to those seats are not inclined to give up those seats to women that they feel didn't have to fight as hard as they did. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to turn a mirror back on us and say some of us women are also the problem. We are contributing to the fact that less girls and women go into STEM, which is obviously a systematic problem, but one that we also have to acknowledge and work towards fixing. Additionally, there is gender bias in hiring. There are gendered expectations. There is a subconscious bias, for example, that people might be more reluctant to hire a woman, especially in their 20s and 30s, because what if they get pregnant? What if they have a baby? We're going to have to replace them. They're going to take career breaks. Their growth is going to be stunted in a way that a man's isn't going to be. It's not as common of a problem in Sweden because there's quite equal paternity leave, but in other countries like the United States, even though they have extremely limited parental leave, there is the expectation that if you hire a woman, that they'll be more responsible for taking care of the home and for having children, and how will that impact the bottom line of the company as well. There is a lack of mentorship and role models, so this is kind of a vicious cycle that we enter into. There's less women going into tech, which means that there's less role models, which means there's less women going into tech. Because ultimately, if we see less role models in specific industries, we are less likely to go into those industries as well, which means that role models and mentorship is an incredibly important thing, which doesn't really help when we have less women, but also when we have women that are being antagonistic to other women. And finally, workplace culture. I'm not 100% sure actually let's see, raise your hand. We know that Silicon Valley, for example, is a bit of a bro-y culture when it comes to tech. You can close your eyes so you don't see anybody else's answer if you want. But raise your hands if you think that the tech industry in Sweden might not bro-y, but is a more male-centric industry. Oh, well, that's good to know. This is a reflection then, and that is good to know then that if the workplace culture feels very bro-y and you have the afterworks and you have usually promotions and the sort of negotiations or the networks that you create are made in afterworks, they're made in like the bastu and things like that, then most of the time women are not going to be part of those afterworks. They're not going to be hanging out probably in the bastu with you guys, which means that they also miss out on a lot of that networking, that community building, and ultimately the promotions that come from it as well. And a lot more women then are less inclined to go into tech if they feel that the culture is too bro-y, because they're also afraid of not being encouraged to have a good work-life balance. They're going to be afraid of maybe having some level of sexual harassment. They're going to be afraid that if there are issues, they're not necessarily going to be protected if they bring it to HR. So all of these sort of things are things that kind of face women that work in tech, in STEM, in general. Oh. So how then can we, both as organizations and let's say individuals in power or individuals that are already kind of part of organizations, is how can we support women within this sphere? Ultimately, it comes down to organizational responsibility, and it comes down to management. Because it can't just be down to lower management or to the individuals to try to fight for this. It ultimately has to be something that's at the core of the company and what they're trying to accomplish. But different things that organizations can do to support women in tech is encouraging continuing education, like you would want to do with most of your employees. In general, employees have a longer ability to stay with a company if they're allowed to feel that they're growing, both in their skills and their education, and they have the chance to advance as well. And so having programs that allow for continuous upskilling and reskilling of employees, especially your female employees, can be something that can support them for their longer journey in tech. Create formal mentorship programs. And this doesn't actually just have to be female mentors, as both women and men need to be allies and mentors for younger people coming in. Create safe and inclusive workspaces. And that can even be things that you don't necessarily think about. Like the women in the room, how many times have you gone into an office and you think maybe the bathroom wasn't necessarily, there was no input from a woman when it came to the bathroom? For example, menstruation, better sanitary equipment, and those sort of things. You notice that if you go into a lot of offices, that they didn't consider that at all. And I've been into offices where they're 50-50. They're clearly catering to a wider audience, but they haven't taken those sort of things into consideration. It's even those small sort of things of how can you actually make it into a friendly environment for both that don't have to cost a lot of money. Being inclusive doesn't have to require an entire overhaul of your system. You don't have to create some sort of group that looks into the research and the data and weighs the pros and cons and does all these things, because ultimately those sort of things tend to involve a lot of money and not very many conclusions. But taking very small steps, like putting a box in the bathroom of your office that has pads and tampons for people, that alone can immediately make you seem like a more inclusive environment without requiring a lot of work on your part. And promoting work-life balance. I know in Sweden we love work-life balance for the men and the women, so this should be something that's more easy to do here. But this should be something that's promoted not just for women, but for everybody, that you should encourage people to pursue hobbies and have families as well. Now, we've discussed the challenges that women face, but women and immigrants face overlapping challenges as well, which is why it's important to discuss both of them, but why it's also important to understand that creating an inclusive environment for both can drastically improve your attraction and retention as an organization. So in Sweden, in 2023, they did a report that the supply of engineers will increase by 35% based on educating people, better education programs for Swedes, but the demand will actually increase by 40% by 2035. So even with all the education that we're doing, even with all the attraction we're trying to do for young Swedes to do more engineering educations, ultimately the demand is going to be higher than the supply, especially if Sweden wants to continue competing in the green energy transition. They want to compete in other technical innovations. So it is required that we do actually have to bring people into the country. Now, tech can be a really good gateway for immigrants from anywhere in the world, because many tech roles rely on skills that can be learned online, so it's a bit more of an equalizer. And the global nature of tech can overcome language barriers. In general, people that are looking for jobs in Sweden, the #1 reason that they'll get for rejection is you don't speak Swedish, and we need you to speak Swedish. Which is understandable in roles like marketing and sales, but within tech, if the main language is English, it's much easier then for more people from around the world to actually come and work in the tech industry. Despite this, there are actually challenges faced by immigrants in tech as well. I won't go into all of them, but the 4 kind of bigger ones is the education bias. So typically here, a lot of recruiters will favor KTH, Chalmers, GU, and have a specific bias against people that were educated at universities elsewhere. That was one of the reasons I did my education at GU, was so that I could at least have a Swedish education on my CV. And I actually went to a meeting with an investor once, and the only thing he looked at when he saw our slide about our founders, he saw GU, and he went, GU. And that was the only thing he noticed out of everything that I had actually put out there. So there is a bias that people that weren't educated in Sweden, they don't trust the education as much, and especially in other industries, there's obviously certifications that are required to work, such as for doctors, but within tech, that shouldn't have to be an issue. Additionally, language barriers, they still use it as an excuse in Sweden, because they'll say, but if they don't speak Swedish, how will they fit into our fika culture? For recruiters or HR in the room, I will tell you that even if we don't speak Swedish, we are very good at drinking coffee in most places in the world, and most of us are not against taking a break during the day. So most of us can actually adapt to the fika culture, but it's often considered this barrier. And being afraid of hiring people because you're afraid of, like, if they don't speak Swedish, they're going to be left out. I do understand, because obviously when a group of Swedes get together, you automatically switch to Swedish. That is 100% you're right, because Swedish is most people's first language. But there are ways that we can work around that, and there are ways that we can be inclusive. And if the language is a very big barrier for you, then, for example, companies can then include Swedish language courses as part of the employment as well. The lack of established networks. Sweden relies a lot on networking. That's kind of the number one feedback that you get. But when you're new to the country, then you don't have those networks that you made in university, for example, or the people that you knew growing up. And additionally, you're not actually as comfortable going to different networking events. I went to an HR event in Gothenburg, and I just kind of stood by myself at some point, because I realized that all these groups knew each other, and I didn't really feel like busting into the middle of the group and be like, "Hallå, eller?" Because I knew that they would stare at me, which they did. So it's both difficult to establish the network, and it's really hard to know where to go to find that network in the first place. And then finally, we have the added stress around immigration. Moving to a new country is already difficult. Being entirely reliant on somebody for your ability to stay in the country both increases the feeling of insecurity, and it increases the possibility of exploitation as well. And that's what we'll talk about a bit in terms of, a lot of times both immigrants and women don't actually feel comfortable advocating for the pay, for example. They don't get as high of salaries, or they don't get, they can't negotiate their salaries as well, because they're afraid of angering their employer, because they're afraid then that they're going to be let go and lose their work permit. Add to that extremely long waiting times to get decisions for extensions, and that can add to a lot of additional stress to somebody's life that can obviously impact their ability to network, to socialize, to participate as much as they want to within the organization and within society. So in terms of then the overlapping challenges for women and men, for women and immigrants, we have the perception of competence. So both when it comes to the education, or in general, women tend to have to overperform to be seen as performing at the same level as men. So there is the perception that they are not as competent. There's the there's the concern regarding cultural fit. So both from the bro culture perspective for women, and then for immigrants, do they speak Swedish? Will they kind of fit into the company culture? They have fewer visible leaders, they have smaller networks, and there's the glass ceiling effect. So in general, for both communities, they can be promoted to a certain extent, but not all the way. There's always going to be, not always, but in general, even within diverse organizations, the C-suite is generally going to be native Swedes, men. And so a lot of people feel that they can't go beyond that point, and they also feel like they're being iced out of there. So if you would like to answer this, What challenges have you faced as a woman and or immigrant in Swedish tech? I'm curious about this one. You can be as wordy or as one word as you like. We're doing it a bit more as a word cloud. Is it not working? Oh no. Let's see if I can change. I fear I'm having technical problems. On an almost daily basis, I have to whisper to myself, I own a tech company, when I can't handle basic technical tasks. We're going to work past that then. We're not going to answer this question. If anybody does have anything they'd like to mention in terms of what challenges have you faced as a woman and or immigrant in Swedish tech, you are welcome to raise your hand, or we can have a discussion about that later as well. Yes?
I'm immigrant and I'm also a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that I can say is that it was a bit more easier for me to be on the market in a tech as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
because in my countries there are huge biases
Mm-hmm.
regarding women in tech.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I moved to Sweden, it was one time to be able to get it. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So to be able to get the interview, it was a different story. Of course, networking here is a big thing, and it's very hard for immigrants to find a network. But as a woman from another country, I felt that it was much easier to get a job. And when I got a job, I was like, wow, okay, is it because I'm woman? And they were biased to actually take me to the company. And it was very strange feelings because not sure, in companies that I was working at, you're treated more as individuals that can do work, but not like a female that showing up in a tech, trying to, and you really had, in my country, I really had to overperform, trying to prove that I'm actually valuable as a worker. But here it was kind of fine. And I was surprised. And I still had, for a couple of years, I had this kind of, am I an imposter? Am I here because I'm woman? Was kind of stuff. So
That's good to know, though. It's good to know your experience. I think the imposter syndrome will never actually go away. So
of course.
Good luck with that. But I think that's an interesting one. And you do hear that, I think, especially when it comes to women, I think that Sweden is much better than a lot of other countries regarding the inclusivity of women.
Just because it was so much worse, it feels nice. It was I'm just no joke. It's it was so much worse that you have to always prove yourself, interviews. I had sometimes I was going to companies where my friends was working, and they knowed me, and they were like, oh yeah, you're good. And then it's like, oh, they were laughing that they're gonna interview another girl. And then I come and I have an interview, I got a job, and they was very oh my God, you can actually do shit, And it was strange. And since you always have these challenges abroad, it's kind of strange to not feel as many here. And I'm happy to share it because I think it's one of the good points about Sweden. Of course, it's very hard from networking perspective. It's terrible. It's just when you come, you have no idea where to go. You don't have no idea where to meet people, especially if you're not the one who was transferred to have a job. So you are supposed to be the one who have to look on the market. But otherwise, I think it's good, and kudos to Sweden for that.
Very nice. Anybody else? Yes.
Thank you. I'm also a woman and also an immigrant. And in my workplace, even though in the whole of the workforce, there is a lot of women, and I would say it's quite balanced. Specifically in the tech part of the operations, I am still the only woman in most of the meetings that I attend. And even though there is like an effort to try to recruit women, there's not a lot of people applying for the tech jobs either. And yeah, there's still a very, very noticeable, like, whatever is admin or more manual work is women, and whatever is tech, very much men.
Interesting. Yeah, I think this is going to be, I'll talk about it a bit later, but this is something that's going to require like several more decades of work in terms of like early education in STEM, because there aren't enough women actually being educated in it in the first place as well.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Thank you.
Exactly.
I'll go really briefly then. Is everybody here that you have jobs, or is anybody here job searching right now? We're going to just whiz through this, but in the future, if in a situation. So what doesn't necessarily work in Sweden is connecting with people on LinkedIn and getting right down to business. I get a lot of requests that are immediately they'll connect and be like, hi, can you help me? And that doesn't work, I think, in any area, but especially in Sweden, that requires kind of a slow burn of a relationship. I've spoken with companies before as well, and applying for jobs that you clearly don't meet the requirements for, so doing the shotgun approach, actually makes it more difficult for other women and immigrants that are qualified in applying for those positions, because eventually HR gets to a point where their eyes are going to glaze over the minute they see somebody actually not from Sweden, because there's so many people that will apply for positions on the basis of, I want to work in Sweden, I'm just going to apply for this job, that they don't actually fulfill the requirements. And that makes it hard on the system as a whole. And then aggressive follow-ups to talent acquisition. Talent acquisition or recruitment tends to be slower in Sweden. So following up on a weekly basis with HR to be like, have you made a decision? Have you made a decision? Tends not to actually endear you to employers. What can work is, I didn't know this when I moved here, but like including personal interests in your CV, or that was my easiest way to network, was to be like, what do you do for hobbies? And to talk about that, focus on your ability to be part of a team rather than your individual accomplishments or being braggadocious. Raising your profile on LinkedIn. I was in scuba diving before, and we don't actually use LinkedIn. So when I moved here, I had almost nothing, and I realized how much LinkedIn is required for those connections in Sweden. So if you can even post like once a week about something that interests you, like don't even worry about the algorithm. Focus on things that interest you, write about things that you're passionate about, just to start slowly raising your profile, and research salary expectations. People either come in too high because they're like, oh, in the US I could make $200,000 a month for this position, or they'll come in too low because they undervalue themselves, and neither of those actually work. So make sure that you actually research what the average salary is for the positions that you're applying for, so that it also reflects that you also understand and are willing to research about Swedish culture as well. From a survey that I sent out, other feedback I got about what works is somebody said that when they saw a job that they were interested in and the hiring manager's contact information was there, they would actually reach out and contact them with a very relevant question about that job advertisement, because it made their name stand out when HR was going through the CVs. Find yourself a Swedish mentor. Servant leadership, so focus when you are at your job or when you're actually in your interviews, focus on how can I support you, my manager, and also continue to upgrade your skills. For people that are worried or interested, there is actually a list that goes out every year from the Swedish government about jobs on the occupational shortage list, so occupations that are actually, they need people. So I always recommend to upskill yourselves in specific areas on those occupational shortage lists, because it also makes work permits more likely to go through as well. For companies, this is, I think, super important when we're talking about women and immigrants and just the tech industry in general. We have to stop being fluffy about DEI. There's a massive pushback against DEI globally right now, and companies are slashing their DEI departments because, in general, DEI is a great idea that often has very poor execution. And that doesn't help anybody. Yes? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there's a lot of companies then that will create DEI departments that then focus on trying to create a more diverse workforce. How can we bring more underrepresented people in? But if it's done on a superficial level, which it often is, because a lot of companies will have DEI because it's like, it's good on their website and it makes you look like you're a diverse employer and it's good for your ESG goals. But if it's on a superficial level, it doesn't actually, it's only damaging. So companies actually have to be very serious about what they're trying to accomplish, and they have to create it as part of their core. So if you're an organization and you're thinking about DEI, 3 things that you need to think about is, do we value integration or assimilation? Because there's a difference. Integration is both sides learning about each other and kind of working to be part of each other's communities. And assimilation is when a person comes in and they have to learn and integrate entirely into the host's ideologies and culture. And that falls into that whole thing that we were discussing about, are they a good cultural fit for the company if they don't speak Swedish? Companies should stop thinking in terms of, is somebody a good cultural fit? And more in terms of, how can we as an organization stretch ourselves culturally to include more people in the organization? Because even if you hire people that look different and are from different places, if everybody fits within a very defined area of a company's culture, then you're not actually getting any diversity in terms of thoughts, experiences, and opinions, which defies the purpose of diversifying in the first place. Additionally, this is for, these apply to everybody, but like, what is more important, education or experience? In terms of what do you actually value, and you can value them both equally. You can value a specific degree more, or you can value experience more, but what do you actually value more? And ultimately, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion actually mean to us? Because you need to think about that and what you hope to accomplish for your organization, not just, let's say, from a moral perspective, but from an economic perspective. You need to actually think about what DEI actually means, and then you need to create a very structured strategy around it, and then go from there. But you can't insert the word DEI into your website and then just leave it, because it doesn't actually work out. So in terms of how can we, all of us, individuals and companies, support women and immigrants in tech, and again, this can apply to everybody, but intentional internships. So what is the purpose of the internships that you're having? Are they free labor? Or are you actually trying to train people and give people more credentials on their CVs in order to have a better standing to enter into other companies? What do you plan to do with those internships? And how do you plan to mentor people through those internships as well? Encourage mentorship. And this should be both men and women that are mentoring people as well, because we can't exist in a vacuum. There need to be allies from everywhere for this. So, but encouraging mentorship, and even potentially, for example, if people want to be in leadership positions, then you can't make it mandatory, but it should be encouraged that people get involved with mentoring so that they can also understand all levels of the company in a better way, and you can create more empathetic leaders. If you're a larger organization, you can make employee resource groups for different types of people, whether that's neurodivergent, whether that's incoming immigrants, whether that's very new graduates or women, creating resource groups and resource materials in order to help them on board faster, but give them a place that they can go to speak freely, can help with a sense of inclusion. Bias training for leaders. A lot of our biases are subconscious. We don't intend to have these biases, most of us. But they exist anyways. So actually doing bias training for the entire organization, that can be everybody that's already in the organization, but also new people coming in, is something that can kind of help people understand each other a bit better and also to check their own biases. Con Ed, continuing education, and specifically early STEM training. So there are companies, a lot of companies in Sweden that support girls who code, women in tech, but actually getting involved from a very early stage and encouraging excitement and interest in STEM is something that can create a larger workforce in the future as well, because we're actually getting people interested at the early stage. And also lift the burden of integration. I think a lot of immigrants will talk about this, about how they're expected to integrate into the country, or they're expected to integrate into an organization. And there is a responsibility to be a responsible participant in the country that you live in. But the burden shouldn't rest entirely on the person coming in. It should rest on the organization, and that's also at a national level from the government as well. But lift the burden of integration from just the individual and make it into an organizational thing. And that actually makes the load much lighter for everybody involved. We're not going to do that. I know I didn't mean to sound super doom and gloom on this. There is a brighter future. We know that the global workforce and the EU is going to require more and more people in order to grow its technical workforce. And I believe, despite the direction that many governments seem to be going, or that sentiment seem to be heading in, I also believe that there are more and more people that are advocating as well, and the ability to advocate has gotten louder. And I think if nothing else, like diversity, you shouldn't diversify just for diversity's sake, but diversity is more than about representation. It's more than just about the superficial level of diversity, but as an organization, diversity can also be a pathway for innovation and economic growth, both for individuals and for the organizations as well. And I think that there's a lot of actionable steps that don't have to require a lot of money or a lot of structural changes in order to make incremental steps towards being a more inclusive tech environment as well. For people that are interested, you guys are already all here, so probably not. But so my company, Emigrate, we are a legal tech startup, and we have been focusing on supporting B2B, so supporting companies understand the legal requirements and compliance requirements for hiring international employees and allowing them to be more informed to lower the barriers to hiring internationals. We are also launching a B2C page that will allow individuals to actually track their immigration histories, to understand things like when they're eligible for permanent residency, get notifications when their permits expire, as well as tools to understand which permits you can actually transition to from inside Sweden. Verified right to work assessments that you could submit to employers as well, and then more resources, because we've found over the last year that there is a growing need for it, and we'd like to put more power in the hands of the immigrants themselves and democratize that information. So for anybody interested, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also use a QR code if you'd like to sign up for the waitlist for the B2C side as well. And if you are an organization that, especially we support SMEs, that's hiring international employees, but you're afraid of making a mistake or you're not 100% sure where to turn, then please reach out and we can have a chat about how we can support you. Thank you.
Do you have questions?
Hi, I'm actually one of the minorities in tech because I'm not a developer, I'm a sysadmin, and I'm a woman, and I actually never thought about like promoting or like making sure that women actually think about that they can work in tech or sysadmin and so. I don't know how I would be able to do that in a good way.
I think you have to do it in a way that obviously like feels right for you or feels true to like your core as well. In general, it like not everything has to be a giant platform for you to discuss things, and it never has to become an ideological thing as well. But I think even more women just like personally talking about how much they enjoy coding or how much they enjoy specific jobs can be an encouragement. So I think that when it comes to encouraging more women, girls from an early stage, but women to actually enter STEM or any industry really, it doesn't have to be some giant movement. It can be very incremental things. And if each woman can influence one woman to have an interest in their own field, then that can make a big difference as well. So I would say it depends on the platform that you have, how much you actually want to advocate or promote that sort of thing. Because I also think that nobody should ever be pressured or forced to advocate for things that they don't feel comfortable advocating for in a way that they don't feel comfortable advocating either. So I don't necessarily have a good answer other than make it personal, really. We can't necessarily, unless you're in a really high position of power, you can't actually affect larger changes, but people tend to attach themselves to personal stories.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
Oh, we have a hand.
Oh, sorry. Close by.
Yeah, what's your stance on organizations hiring people from underrepresented groups instead of, so to say, better candidates or candidates that are more qualified for the position?
I think that was what I was discussing about the issue of DEI, is that one of the big pushbacks against it is the poor execution. I think I don't have a clear way on how it can be done best, but I think it's damaging for DEI as a whole if people are being hired exclusively on factors outside of competencies, I would say. I may get canceled by people in the room, but like I think that it is really, and that's the whole thing about the superficial DEI concept, is that we have to actually go to the core of it, of how can we help increase the competencies of people that are underrepresented so that it is more of an equal playing field, and also don't let things like workplace culture and those sort of and subconscious biases get in the way of hiring equally competent people. But I don't agree that somebody that's not qualified should be hired in lieu of somebody else on account of DEI. And one of the issues that is coming out about DEI is the fact that in general, if it's not executed properly, it takes gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation into consideration, but not class or wealth. And those are things that then people from different classes, even if they ethnically are the same, they obviously have different experiences, opinions, and thought processes as well, which means that there's so much more that you have to take into consideration, but a lot of companies don't do it correctly.
Any further ones? Maybe we take one last in case somebody have.
What was your biggest struggle coming to Sweden and getting into the labor market?
I will say it was really lonely for a long time. It felt really isolating. I think that it's difficult for me, I think, to speak about it sometimes simply because I feel I'm not equipped because I was in a position to be able to start my own company, and most people don't have that option. And I also had the privilege of time and money in order to wait things out or try to find my own solutions. And again, a lot of people aren't in that position as well. But I think the biggest, honestly, like the isolation, but also the real reflection and questioning of your entire career leading up to that point, because like I couldn't even get considered for internship positions, which is, it's a bit of a thing of I was simultaneously underqualified and overqualified. So that's an issue that a lot of people have, is they can't get the jobs that they're qualified for, so they go for jobs that they're overqualified for, but then they can't get hired for those because then they're seen as a flight risk, because why would you be applying to this position when you're overqualified for the position? So a lot of people face that, they're kind of in a catch-22 on that. But I think that a lot of people probably question a lot of their life choices leading up to that point. And I spent a lot of time reflecting on that, like, what did I do wrong? Any other questions, reflections? Yes.
Is there?
Being a white middle-aged man in the room, when I started at Chalmers studying electronics, I was very surprised that there were very few girls. And I just came from the army. And in my platoon, there was actually a higher percentage of girls or women than at my starting course at Chalmers.
Oh.
And that worried me a lot, because, I mean, software and electronics, girls are usually better at maths. They are doing better in school. And then if you were looking at classes for construction, there was more women there. And a lot of in chemistry. So in the technical area, it seemed like a lot of women did not choose software or electronics. And you could see similar thing in the computer courses as well. So this doesn't solve the problem with immigrants, but it's a question when it comes to, I mean, to get women into this position, I think we need to start very early. At the university level, it's already too late. If we don't get them to actually choose the industry there,
Yeah.
then it takes 20 years to solve it again.
Yeah.
So do you have any ideas how we could get young girls to get more interested into the STEM area?
I think that's a really interesting reflection, and I think that it probably reflects, honestly, that something happens in the early teenage years, because also when they're younger, kids are interested in what they're interested in. So if there is a higher interest in things like construction and STEM and all of those things at a younger age, then at some point it becomes uncool, and that generally I think happens in the early teenage years. And I think it comes down to a lot of social cues, societal pressure, and then pressure from the family as well. And I think that's when we start to clearly define more what's like, what are more masculine jobs and feminine jobs. I don't know if I think it could come down to we need more role models and we need more visible people. I think probably as a society we need to make science cool again. I don't know how that's gonna go, but I think it ultimately comes down to we need more role models for people in order to kind of overcome the biases and the social pressure that comes at the teenage years. Because I think that's a super interesting reflection about Chalmers versus the military as well. I wouldn't have expected that. I think it mostly just comes down to social and also, I guess, like making STEM cool for women.
Thank you for a good talk.
Thank you.
Do you have any advice for volunteer organizations, how they can start to make a difference? How they can start to make a change there? If they are more like male dominant as organizations, how they can attract more females and have more diversity?
That's like what kind of volunteer organizations?
Any, like this one now, but any. When it's volunteer based, it's not about workplace, it's not about salary anymore.
I think in that place, like I think a lot of times what we're looking for is community and network. So I think probably pushing those aspects of it and making it into more of a community event and highlighting that rather than the volunteering aspect of it could be beneficial, as well as obviously having... It's hard because, like, yeah, you need to attract women, and then you need to have women to attract women, and then it goes again and again and again. But I think that it ultimately comes down to if you can push the fact of community and around maybe community gatherings outside of just the volunteering part of it in order to push that, but also if you can then make connections with companies or with other volunteer organizations in order to actually help them expand their network even further, then that may attract. We're gonna have to talk about that later. I have to think on that one.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up due to the time, but thanks a lot, Saaya, for this engaging talk and this bringing out the reflections of the society. Thank you.
you.
Thanks a lot.